Welcome back to episode 2 of this multi-part series about Middletown, Ohio. This is your host, Ken Federnick. And in episode 1, we learned about the tensions that were mounting between some angry members of the community on the one side and the district superintendent and its board of trustees on the other. The issues were over health mandates and a belief among some that the district's commitment to diversity and equity were actually promoting racial divides. This could have escalated into a full-blown culture war like those that have occurred in many communities across the country. But here in this politically diverse Midwest city, midway between Dayton and Cincinnati, Ohio, they found a way to defuse the tensions and to move forward together. Here again is Marlon Styles, the superintendent of Middletown Schools and a central figure in this story.
So that night, I chuckle about it now, but that night, I was driving home and I told myself, you're going to have to shut up. And I remember thinking what do you mean you're going to have to shut up? I love to talk. Everybody knows I love a microphone. I love a crowd. But I knew that if I said anything, it would add fuel to the fire. My strategy was to lead the school district through this potential crisis to prevent any type of divisive culture war from really amplifying. And I knew if I didn't provide leadership, I knew that I would have to own my part in allowing this racist cultural divide to really start to gain momentum. So what I chose to do was to really lean on what we're calling the quiet majority. There's a lot of people in this world right now that have an opinion too. And just because I'm not on a microphone, babbling my mouth as loud as I can, waving my arms, making false accusations, just because I'm not acting out, doesn't mean that my opinion is not important. So I really started thinking about, how do you rally the village and really empower and activate the quiet majority?
The positive gossipers strategy is such a cool one. I've thought about this a lot.
Once again, here's Courtney Martin, the journalist who first captured this story in the Christian Science Monitor.
Basically, Marlon Styles, when he first came into leadership, decided, as opposed to sort of trying to shield all of the warts and wounds of any school system, he said, let me do a quarterly meeting where I get a bunch of different people from across the community in a room with me, and I share the good, bad, and the ugly about what's going on in the district, the questions I'm working with, what I'm struggling with, what I'm succeeding at, and then ask them that in turn for my offer of truth, that they would go out in the community and really highlight some of the great things that are happening in the school. And that because of that trust, they would be comfortable knowing that they know what's not going great and how I'm working on it. And certainly could talk about that if it came up in conversations, but that they would really be ambassadors of sharing what is working.
And I started thinking about who's the right quiet majority that can really entertain having a conversation about how we're going to handle this. Notice I'm not saying how I'm going to handle this, but how we. If you go back to what I said in the beginning, once a Middie, always a Middie. And there's a great sense of pride in the community about being a Middie. So I thought about who the right group was that would represent the pridefulness of being a Middie, and it was the Middletown Area Ministerial Alliance.
The Ministerial Alliance, it was a previously segregated alliance, interestingly, that had integrated in the last, I think it was about 5 years. And Reverend John Wagner, who's one of the sort of key figures in this whole story, was the first white leader ever of the integrated Ministerial Alliance. So here you have Marlon Styles, who's the first Black superintendent of Middletown Schools, John Wagner, the first white head of this Ministerial Alliance, which I found to be such an interesting combination.
My name is John Wagner, and I came to Middletown, Ohio, 11 years ago. I'm now retired. I retired from the church I was serving, First United Methodist Church of Middletown. I was assigned by my bishop to go there, really enjoyed it. I chose to be part of the Ministerial Alliance pretty quickly after I got here. I grew up in the 60s. My father was a freedom rider, which meant that he went to Alabama, Mississippi to march and go to church, or help to integrate churches rather forcefully back in the civil rights movement. So I grew up with that. My family was progressive politically. In order to rebel, I had to rebel against being that progressive. So I did rebel a little bit. And because I knew a lot of progressives, I knew kind of their foibles, and I guess I had a lot of those as well. But I really wanted to get to understand other people and why they might disagree, and have pretty much been looking at that for most of my life. I chose to serve churches, and while I've been involved with progressive causes, anti-war movements, and race relations and so forth, my congregations have tended to be much more conservative, and I love them and really wanted to be a part of their lives and minister to them. That's just part of the job. I know that in Ohio and elsewhere around the United States, teachers and officials at schools, school boards are being asked to not make students uncomfortable by talking about slavery or what happened to indigenous peoples here in this country. And I have to say that that's reprehensible to me. Yes, any kind of education ought to be uncomfortable. My education was uncomfortable, and sometimes it was made uncomfortable by persons I would call right wing. I mean, they brought up things that I wouldn't have known otherwise, and ways in which liberals and progressives like myself have made things worse from time to time. So yes, I understand that. I'd heard that the school board had been attacked by a local political figure in the worst possible way, not just around critical race theory and the supposed teaching of that to students, but also the mask mandates and the mask policy. Was during COVID. I'd lost 3 congregation members to COVID, and I felt strongly that people needed to be protected, families needed to be protected. So that was a big part of my motivation. But I also knew that, and I don't know a whole lot about critical race theory, I'm not an expert on this. I know enough about how people want to change, the way we look at American history or American society, to know that sometimes change agents can exaggerate, what's wrong with America or what's wrong with our history. But I also know that the school board here in Middletown is a pretty settled middle-class group, Republicans and Democrats, as far as I know, eager to just make the best possible education for students. So if they were being attacked for being radicals, I just felt that was patently untrue. And I felt I needed to be there to defend my own congregation member, but also the rest of the people on the school board, some of which are my neighbors. And I know that politics is unfair and people need to find ways to crystallize support, but I just didn't like seeing that in Middletown.
Essentially, Marlon presented to the Ministerial Alliance. He said, this is what happened at the school board meeting. I need your help. Like, is this what you think represents Middletown? And the Ministerial Alliance said, no, we need to stand up with you and for you. And so we're going to come up with a plan.
We just simply asked them a very powerful question, but a simple question. That's, does this represent what you believe this community stands for? We didn't weigh in our opinions or thoughts. We let the community members, the quiet majority, those leaders, take a position. When they said absolutely not, I knew it was game on. So I posed the very next question by design, and it simply was, what are we going to do about it? And that's where we came up with this message of unity, relationship, love, and trust.
So their plan became to sign up for school board speaking slots and just come and not directly combat questions around masking, although some of them would thread that in, but more just to represent what they think Middletown is about and what they think we need to do to focus on the kids, as opposed to the sort of political hot button issues that seem to be distracting people so deeply from, our kids learning, our kids safe, our kids emotionally healthy.
The platform that our board president, Chris Urso, gave them just really allowed us to do something magical. It was pretty neat to watch.
Here again is parent Tom Falk.
This was a stroke of political savvy by our school board, inviting people from the community, faith leaders who could speak with some authority and who pushed back against the sentiment of anger and fear and vitriol these faith leaders and people from the community, parents, just ordinary citizens that I didn't know, showed up, and they breathed empathy, compassion, appreciation, gratitude. These folks spoke in a different emotional register. I felt a sense of humility, and it changed the atmosphere in the room and in our school community.
So the neat part about some of the future board meetings when they showed up, we thought about public participation. We had board policy around 30 minutes, 3 minutes per speaker. And as leaders from across the community, quiet majority leaders really surfaced, and the Middletown area Ministerial Alliance faith-based leaders showed up. We shifted the microphone. We put the microphone in the middle of the room. So you were front and center, and anything you said, you had to own it. And we put the camera on individuals.
I'd like to welcome Dr. Celeste Diedrich Davis to speak to us this evening.
Dr. Celeste Davis spoke one night. She's the president of the NAACP Middletown chapter.
Good evening. I just wanted to speak a little about critical race theory.
She kicked us off one night with a beautiful, an absolutely beautiful, precise verbal articulation of what critical race theory is and how it's being taught and where it's being taught.
There seems to be considerable misconception as to what it is and where it's normally placed. Critical race theory is a body of legal scholarship and an academic movement from the civil rights movement for scholars and activists to discover the intersection of race and the law. I want to help people not misunderstand that critical race theory and culturally responsive pedagogy or curriculum are two very different things. Culturally competent curriculum is indeed in a good place in a school system. It allows children to see themselves, whether differently abled, ethnic, race, socioeconomic status, a variety of different demographics, including blonde hair versus brown hair or blue eyes, green eyes, etc.
She set the horizon for the conversation and laid the runway out. After her rendition, we had some of those folks like Kent Keller who came up and changed their whole position when the room was stacked with quiet majority leaders and went from the demand and the finger in your face and accusations to request and please, can you, may I, can you share, can you provide? It came request. The faith-based leaders took the microphone, and their message of unity just sang so loud in that room that night. And they weren't talking to me as the Black superintendent. They weren't talking to the board president, Chris Ursel. They weren't talking to the other 4 board members. They were talking to the community.
Good evening. My name is Michael Bailey, pastor of Faith United Church. I'm also a proud alumni of the Middletown class of 1972 that believes once a Middie, always a Middie. I stand on the shoulders of those Middies that stood the test of hard times to make Middletown strong. Middletown is a strong city. It's strong because of our faith to love and respect one another. It's strong because of our diversity. I'm here tonight because I have confidence in each board member and confidence in Mr. Marlon Styles and his team of administrators and committed teachers to stay the course of #Middie Rising. As you move forward, I encourage each one of you to do what's in the best interests of our children. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I went into the school board meeting hoping to affirm the integrity of the teachers and the school board. The superintendent had gotten high marks when he first came in as being somebody who really wanted to energize the school district, and he was supported by the teachers I knew and many of the parents I knew. So yes, I wanted to go in there and say something about that, but I also didn't want to put down the concerns of people who feel like they're being left out, and that could include both white and Black. So I wanted to strike some kind of balance.
Can I welcome John Wagner to speak to the Board of Education this evening?
I am not a Middie. I haven't been here just but 10 years. My one advantage, however, is to be able to compare communities. I've served in a number of communities in this state and in Indiana, and I've never been in a community that had this kind of cohesiveness, I have to say, and such a diverse population. I've been in some small towns that were very homogeneous, but I'm just proud of this, and it's been something that I've seen throughout my tenure here. And so I have to say, I'm just impressed with this town, and I'm impressed with the leadership generally, and I would encourage the community to support elected leaders as much as possible, not without some criticism, legitimate criticism, but recognizing these are complex issues, and there needs to be nuance and research and honest disagreements. I want to support the board in its endeavor to have a diverse student body and respect for different cultures, and to instill that in our students. I think it's very important. So thank you.
Thank you.
I was trying to be there as a pastor, asking the community to remember its basic values and come together and work this out in a reasonable fashion.
They continue to share that message of unity, trust, love, and relationship to their congregation. The beautiful thing about it was white, black, Hispanic, male, female, different denominations, faith-based leaders from across the community took advantage of the platform. They owned in their own special way, and they took a lot of pride in owning the moment. And as Michael Bailey said one time, that they were just there to just stomp the nonsense out, and they were willing to come back as long as they needed to really stand for what the community believed in. Was just something that has changed my life forever. I was so impressed and forever changed with their leadership. I call it legacy, and it's the legacy of the board. Because of their leadership, because of the faith-based leaders that really surface, the legacy in this whole story is what's able to happen now. What was able to happen is we were able to announce that we're hiring 25 black male certified educators in the next 5 hiring seasons. We announced the Admiral Squad, a black male affinity group. The legacy is the passport to tomorrow, trying to get 100 industry representatives to endorse the district vision to provide workforce experiences for kids, kindergarten, 5-year-old kindergartners through 18-year-olds that are seniors in high school. Not money, but human capital to provide those workforce-based experiences that really change the lives of kids. The legacy is the diversity training that the staff was able to receive because they were yearning for different ways to better connect with our kids who come from diverse backgrounds. The legacy is going to be that the work didn't stop because reactionary politics showed up. The legacy is going to be that Middies always stand united with a great deal of pride, and they'll always fight for their community. If I had to do it over again, the advice I would give would be to go ahead and start those preventative measures and take some action prior to it showing up. To try to engage some folks prior to really try to get a better perspective on what the feeling or the vibe was in the community, and try to come up with a way to kind of inspire that unity and prevent the accusations from happening. Now that's foresight. That's having the courage to try to invite an uncomfortable moment before it shows up. But I wish that work would have happened earlier, and I wish we'd have put some things in motion prior to. The second thing I would say, if I found myself in the middle of it right now, it's never too late to just stop and listen. And I can't say that more simply, just to stop and listen. I was fortunate to have a great relationship with our board president, Dr. Chris Urso, and it gave us a chance to think about how do we want to deal with this together so it's not just one person. Another bit of advice I would give if you're kind of going through it is it doesn't have to be your voice. It doesn't have to be you to try to figure out how to come up with a message or a communication or a combination of words that are going to change people's opinions. We try to own that so much as leaders that sometimes it's not about our voice. Sometimes it's about the people's voice. My advice would be go find the people. For me, I called it the quiet majority. Go find the quiet majority and find ways to empower them. Hopefully those relationships are there to where when the phone rings, they're willing to have a conversation with you. But think creatively about different platforms that you can invite to the school district so that your quiet majority can start to share perspectives and have their voice heard and really offer them to think about how to address what's happening. The hard part about all this, if I can be honest with you, as I kind of think back, is the scary part. I should say the hard part, but the hard part is finding the courage, because the scary part is if I speak up, I don't want to become the target. And luckily we had some people who had the courage and didn't care if they became the target. Just trying to find that quiet majority who's willing to stand united as a collective, so that individuals aren't a singular point of emphasis where they can become the target. So the strategy or piece of advice I would offer is, go formulate that quiet majority and create a space where collectively they can stand up for what they believe in.
Hi again. This is your host, Ken Futernick. As we come to the end of this episode, I'm struck by how many interesting and at times counterintuitive lessons can be learned from this story. In the third and final episode, you will hear from several Middies, but also from a few outsiders who reflect on the significance of the story for communities like Middletown. One of the people you will hear from in that episode is Amanda Ripley, an internationally acclaimed expert on conflict, who talks about the understory, not what we see above the waterline, in this case, the mask mandates in the video Superintendent Styles posted about diversity and inclusion that sparked the angry response back in 2021, but the less visible, more complicated dynamics that play out below the waterline, like fear, respect, stress, and power. Unless we know what's really going on under the surface, Ripley says, it's hard to know what actions can help diffuse a dangerous conflict. I do want to add an important footnote here. One of Styles' loudest critics, you may recall from the first episode, was a man named Kent Keller. I really wanted to interview him for this story to get his perspectives on what occurred back in 2021 when things got really tense. Were his actions really driven by reactionary politics, as Styles suggested? Or was it fear or lack of respect or some other understory playing out? I've also been curious to know what Keller might have thought about the public comments that were made at subsequent board meetings by the positive gossipers and the members of the Ministerial Alliance. I wonder if their comments were reassuring or whether they had a different effect. I did reach out to Mr. Keller and we had a brief exchange, but in the end, I was unable to get him to agree to do an interview with me. One last thing before we bring this episode to a close. One of the most important lessons I've learned from this story is one you'll hear Courtney Martin talk about in the next episode. The beauty of the story, she says, is the dilution of the distraction. Styles, the board, and community leaders said, no, we are focusing on kids. We are focusing on what matters. The ultimate goal for Superintendent Styles, and the goal of my podcast for that matter, is not simply to avoid conflict, to avoid culture wars, or to get people to be civil. It's about creating an environment where the school and the community can focus their collective attention on serious problems affecting student learning. As we record this, it's now spring 2024, and Deborah Hauser, the current superintendent, and her board of trustees, several members of the Ministerial Alliance, and other community leaders are doing just that. They're working together to address a serious educational threat, essentially what amounts to a kind of post-pandemic pandemic. In communities across America, large numbers of students are not coming back and attending school on a regular basis. In Middletown, close to 45% of the district students are now chronically absent from school, a huge increase over pre-pandemic numbers. Well, students simply cannot learn if they're not in school, and even missing a few days each month will cause many of them to fall behind academically and to lose valuable connections with their peers. If left unchecked, it will undoubtedly cause many of them to drop out entirely before they graduate from high school. Middletown's district leaders have launched an initiative called Middie Minutes Matter to help kids get back in school, not through punitive measures, but by first identifying and then addressing the barriers that are contributing to the problem. Transportation, anxiety, homelessness, whatever emerges in the district's efforts to understand the problem. And this is where the Ministerial Alliance and other communities leaders come in. They've been meeting regularly to identify ways they can complement what the district is doing to improve student attendance. That kind of collaboration simply would not be happening if district leaders were still preoccupied with a nasty conflict. Well, thanks for tuning in to this, the second of 3 episodes about the schools in Middletown, Ohio. I hope you will listen to the third and final episode that focuses on the takeaways from this story. You can, of course, find all of our episodes at schoolconversations.org and wherever you listen to your podcasts. So long for now.